In this video, I'm going to show you how you can use Drupal VM in a way that lets it run pretty fast as on a Mac or Linux, within Windows using something called a reverse-mounted share. So it's kind of like if you want to think of it as Drupal VM outside in, because usually you use Drupal VM in a way where you share a folder from your computer into the VM. That way you can develop on your project locally, and then the changes will show up inside of Drupal VM. In this case on Windows, because most of the shared folder options like Samba and the native share, and pretty much anything besides rsync, which has its own problems, all those shares are really slow and cause your Drupal VM performance to be really slow. This process that I'm going to show lets you have full speed development with Drupal running really fast, basically as fast as you would if you were running it natively. But it also lets you edit your files within the Windows environment and do things like config export or features or things like that. So I have a blog post on this, and this video will be kind of a companion to the blog post. But basically, there's only a couple things that you need to have installed to be able to do this. You need VirtualBox and Vagrant, just like you would with any Vagrant-based project installation. And then you also need PuTTY, which is actually not used for any kind of TTY usage. Like we're not going to use that thing's console, but we use another program that comes with it called Pageant. Also, if you're on Windows 7, you need to make sure that you're running PowerShell 4 or later. If you're on Windows 8 or 10, there's no problem. You don't need to install that. And then finally, you need a terminal environment that will let you do things like SSH, which PowerShell doesn't natively do, at least not at this point in time. So we'll use Commander for that. If you're running Windows 10 and you use the Windows subsystem for Linux and all that, that might be all that you need. You might not need to do this, but even if you're on Windows 10, this information could be useful if you're encountering some performance issues. The first thing that you need to do in any case is create an SSH key. And on Windows, usually this involves using PuTTY with its own tools to build a key or something like that. In my case, I'm going to do this the same way I do on all my Macs and Linux computers. I'm just going to use the SSH keygen tool. So I'm going to copy this command, and then I'm going to go into Commander, which is right here. Let me close this window. I'm going to run it as administrator. Usually when you're interacting with Vagrant, you want to do it as administrator and not just as a general user. Otherwise, some things can have issues. So I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to paste in that command. First, I'm going to make sure, I think before this I had already created a key, so I'm going to delete that key, .ssh. And now I'm going to paste that command, and I'm going to put my email address in here. And then if I hit enter, it's going to build the key pair, and then it's going to ask me where to save it. And also ask me for a passphrase. In this case, I'm not going to enter a passphrase. I'm just going to wait until it builds it, then hit enter 3 times. Okay, so now I have the SSH key, and I want to get my public key so that I can put it into GitHub and Acquia Cloud and wherever else I need to authenticate. So I'm going to say cat, it's .ssh is where it saves it, /id rsa.pub. Now, a note on SSH keys, the public key can be shared anywhere. In fact, I'm going to print mine to the screen here, and I don't have any danger of you being able to log in as me because I still have my private key private. So never share your private key. Don't even copy it anywhere for best security. The one that's just ID RSA, don't ever share that with anyone. idrsa.pub is your public key, and you can share that thing with anyone, anywhere, and anytime. So I'm going to copy this key, starting with SSH and going all the way to the end of my email address. I go to Edit, Copy, and then I'll go into Chrome, and I'm going to first go to GitHub and open my settings. And then in here, there's a section for SSH keys. And I'll go in here, there's a button for new key. Type in a title, Win7 test, paste the key, and add it. And I need to enter my password really quick, so hold on. I need to grab it. Here it is. paste it in there. Okay, so that's my GitHub password, and now it has that key in here, and it's saying I've never used it yet. And then I'm also going to add my key in Acquia Cloud because I'll need to download databases from Acquia Cloud. So go to Edit Profile, Credentials, and it wants me to enter my password there. So I'll do that as well. And there's that. And then I can add the key here. And I need to go back into my terminal to copy it out again. Paste it in here and add it. So now I have my SSH key in GitHub and here. Another quick note about GitHub, if you go to github.com/anyone's username, so I'll delete this out here, and then enter .keys, that's actually going to show you all the keys that that user has for GitHub. So it's just another confirmation that your public keys are completely public. Anybody can see anyone else's public keys, and that's no problem. Just never paste your private key anywhere. And if you do accidentally, you should delete that key and create a new key. All right, so now that I have those in, I can do the next step, which in this case, I need to install and use Pageant. And this is just installed alongside PuTTY. This isn't strictly necessary, this shouldn't be necessary actually on Windows, but there is one bug in Vagrant, and I linked to that bug in my blog post. Basically, Vagrant's supposed to be able to pick up your keys within Commander, but for some reason it's not doing that right now when you run Vagrant up or Vagrant provision. So the best way to work around that is to install this program. So I'm going to, I already installed it, and now I need to launch it, and it is stored inside my drive /program files, PuTTY, and then the first thing that I need to do before I run this is I need to open PuTTygen, which is a key generator, but in this case I'm not generating a new key, I'm actually converting the key that I just created using OpenSSH. I'm converting this key into a new private key that's in a format that Pageant can use. So I'm going to say open, and then save private key, no passphrase on it, and then I'm going to call it idrsa.ppk, and that will save it as a PuTTY private key. Save it. Okay, now I can close this, and then I'm going to open up Pageant. It's, apparently I already had it running. And then I can go into Pageant, and I can make sure that my key, I need to right-click on it and view keys. I can make sure my key is loaded. This, I think, is my old key, so I'm going to remove that key and add a new key. And this is the key that I had just created, the PPK file. Open that, and then I can close out of here. Now my key's loaded in, and I can use it to be able to connect to different services. So the next step is we need to build a copy of Drupal VM that has all the right settings for our project. So the easiest way to do this is to clone it from GitHub. So the first things first, though, I'm going to go into Commander, and this isn't strictly necessary at this point, but I'm going to do it here just for future proofing's sake. I'm going to run start SSH agent, and that automatically loads in your key that you just created in Commander into Commander's own SSH agent. And in the future, like I said, you won't need to use Pageant once that bug is fixed in Vagrant. So now that that key's loaded, I can clone Drupal VM straight from GitHub. So I'm going to copy this command to clone Drupal VM from GitHub. Go back over here and paste it in. And I'm just cloning this into my user folder, but you can clone this anywhere where you save your projects. I'm going to go into the Drupal VM folder, and this has a copy of Drupal VM, and it's actually, since I cloned it, it lets me use Drupal VM as a Git repository. So if I wanted to pin to a certain version of Drupal VM, I could say git checkout 4.4.0 or something like that. Or I can say git checkout master, and that'll bring me back up to date with master. So that's a helpful way. If you ever need to use a new feature that's not been released yet, you can actually move your Drupal VM copy forward or backwards in time. And all the files that we'll create are files that will not be in version control inside of Drupal VM. So the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to create a small script to create a folder in my project that I need to be able to put my project into the VM. So I'm going to create this script, paste this here, and then I'm going to edit the script using Nano. And actually, Nano, I forgot, is not installed in Commander, so I'm going to just use Windows Explorer to open it in Notepad++. So I'm going to go into Jeff Geerling, Drupal VM, examples, scripts, setup.sh. One important note whenever you're editing files inside of Windows is to always make sure you're using Unix line endings. Otherwise, scripts that are run inside Drupal VM might have issues. So I'm going to change this to Unix, and then I'm going to go back to my website, the blog post, and copy this little script out. This script, all it does is it creates a directory and makes sure that Vagrant is the owner of the directory so that we can write our project to it. So I'm going to copy that, come back to Notepad, paste it, and save that file. Then I'm also going to create a config file that has just the configuration I need to be able to run Drupal VM the right way. So I'm going to create the config file here inside of the Drupal VM root folder, and then I'm going to go back over to Windows Explorer and go back into the VM and open this file in Notepad++, again making sure that I convert line endings to Unix. And then I'll copy and paste all of this. There's one variable that you'll need to change. It's the Drupal deploy repo, and I'll talk about that in a second once I've copied this across. Whoops. Okay, copy. And you can probably hear my computer's fan spinning up as I'm trying to record this while I'm doing a remote session and also recording my video. My poor Mac today. So this is the only variable that you'll need to change. You need to go to your GitHub repository, the one that it's either your fork or an upstream repository, and you'll need to copy that repository's Git URL. And mine in this case is github/geerlingguy/eejgeerling. So I'm going to grab the URL here and make sure you use the SSH URL, not the HTTPS one. So I'm going to copy that, come back over here, and paste that in place here. And I want to use the master branch because I'll be doing development on master. I'll create forks, or I'll create branches off of there. This also says make sure it's at the latest version whenever you provision, and this needs to change. Anything that says project name needs to change to my project's name. So in my case, it's eejgeerling. So I'm going to say eejgeerling, 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 and I don't know if there's anywhere else in here that has that project name. Nope. Okay, so I changed those all, and there's another thing that's a little bit different than normal in here. There's some extra ports that are open, and these are to allow the Samba share to work in reverse. Also, this is where we call the script that we just created. This script is going to run before any other provisioning happens, so that when we do provision and pull the code base into Drupal VM, the permissions will be correct on that directory. And all these other settings are settings that are for most BLT projects to support different features that are running on those sites. So I'm going to save that config file. Again, I'm going to make sure that my line endings are Unix. They are. And then I think, let's go back to here to make sure that we're at the right place. The next step is to run Vagrant up. And if there's a problem during Vagrant up, and you can run Vagrant provision again just to make sure that it's running correctly. If it still has a problem, it might be a bug or something, but you can always ask in the Drupal VM issue queue. So I'm going to go back over here and say Vagrant up. And while it's doing this, I'm going to speed up the video because this takes 5 to 10 minutes the first time that you do this on your computer. It could take a little longer if you have a really slow internet connection. At this point, if I go into this URL that it gives in the message that comes up at the end of Drupal VM's provisioning, whoops, I will go over to Chrome, and this is the dashboard for Drupal VM. This is going to show me a lot of information. So if I didn't have the host manager plugin, I could copy this and put it in my host file. It also shows you how to connect to the MySQL server if you have a MySQL client running on your computer. It has a link to the host name, gives you where the document root is inside the VM. Also gives you links to all the tools that you have installed. In this case, there's Adminer, so if I wanted to administer the database, I could open this and log in as Drupal with the password Drupal, the database Drupal. And right now I think the database is empty, but you can use that tool in the browser to be able to do that. Also, MailHog catches any emails that are sent from your local site, so you can go into this interface and browse your emails and test them and make sure they're working and looking correctly. And then it also gives you PHP information along with a link to the PHP info, so you can make sure your PHP settings are all correct. But if I go to this host name right now, it's going to show me a Drupal install page because I don't have the database yet. With the way BLT works, you pull down your database from the staging server or from some other environment to your local. So I'm going to go ahead back over to the command line, and the rest of the setup I'm going to do inside of the VM. So I'm going to say vagrant SSH to log into the VM. It's going to log me into Ubuntu, and now you'll see my command line changes to show that I'm vagrant at localhost here, and it gives me the path. And then I'm going to run Composer install. It already did Composer install during provisioning, but I'm going to run it again just to make sure it picks up any other dependencies that the non-interactive mode might have missed. So I'm going to say Composer install. It's going to look for all the dependencies, make sure that everything's loaded. It looks like there's a few things that it hadn't installed, and it's putting those in now. And then I need to also run a couple other commands. I need to set up a file and run a command to make sure that BLT is going to work correctly. So the first thing I'm going to do is, after this completes, I'm going to create a project.local.yaml file. So I'm going to say touch blt/project.local.yaml. And then I'm going to use nano since I'm inside the VM and my files aren't accessible outside the VM yet. I'm going to say nano blt project.local.yaml. And then I'm going to put in a drush override to say since I'm working within this environment and I'm not working with a remote SSH server, the drush alias that's going to be used is self. So I'm going to tell BLT to use that. Drush aliases, and there's 2 spaces for indentation, local self. And then save that file and exit with Control O and Control X. And then the next step is to run BLT's post-provision script. Now, by the time you're watching this video, this bug will probably be fixed, and you could just run this command, /vendor/acquia BLT scripts Drupal VM post-provision.sh. But right now there's an issue with the script that causes it to have some errors. But after you run that script, you would say exit, and then you'd say vagrant SSH to log back in, and that would pick up the BLT command. And I'm going to see if it's working here. You can run BLT version just to test if it's working. Yeah, so that command didn't work, and in that case, you can actually go to the BLT post-provision file, which I have linked in my blog post. And you can copy out the command that you need to run, which is this one right here. So I'm going to go back over to my terminal, run that command, and now I can exit and vagrant SSH. And now if I run BLT version, it should output the BLT version showing that BLT is working correctly. The last thing I need to do, if I'm using Node.js, which most projects do use Node.js to do things like Sass compilation, I also need to update the permissions manually on the global npm directory. So I'm going to grab the command for that out of my blog post, which is right here, and not the yes. That's a typo that I'll have fixed in here. Paste that. And then the last step is to run BLT local refresh, and that's going to rebuild my local environment, pull the database down from staging, and run database updates and all the different things that need to happen to get my local environment set up. So local refresh. And usually this takes 1 or 2 minutes on my Mac. And the nice thing about this setup is this will only take 1 or 2 minutes on Windows too. If you use a Samba or a standard shared folder, it could take 10 or 20 minutes because of how slow those shares are. And if you're using a spinning hard disk and don't have an SSD that's fast, it could take even longer. So this is one of the big advantages to running Drupal VM this way, kind of an outside-in approach. Also, if you're using BLT, the first time it connects, it's going to ask if you want to verify the host key. You have to type yes and hit enter. If you don't do that quickly, it might error out. In that case, just run BLT local refresh again. So at this point, it's pulling down the database, it's sanitizing it, clearing out all the passwords, making sure that it's secure in case anybody ever hacked your computer, they couldn't reverse engineer your password. And then it's running a config import to make sure that all the configuration that I have locally is set correctly on the site. It's also running a config import using config split, making sure that all my local configuration overrides are taken into account. So it's enabling some modules that I use for local development, all that kind of stuff. And it looks like it finished. It took about 2.5 minutes. That's close to the same amount of time it takes on my Mac using NFS. So it's pretty fast using it this way. It's a lot faster than you'd think. So I'm going to go back here, and if I go to this site now, it should be the same as what's on my staging environment. So if I go here, I can see that the site is all set up. And if I go to my staging environment, which is, I think, acquiastage.jeffgeerling.com, these two environments, you can see that it's literally identical to my local environment now. And then another note is since the database was sanitized, you'll need to use Drush to be able to get a login link. And Drush has a command ULI, and I think that stands for user login link or something like that. You need to run that command in the doc root. There's other ways you can do this. I'm not going to get into it in this video, but for simplicity's sake, I'm going to go into the doc root, and then I'm going to run Drush with URI equals local.eejgeerling.com, and then the command ULI. That would log me in as the user one account, the kind of like the root user of the Drupal site. You can also pass in another argument like Geerling guy. If that's my account name, it would log me in as that account. In this case, I'm going to log in as the user one. That's going to give me this link, which I can grab and copy. And then if I paste it in here, it will log me in. So at this point, I have a functional local website, but if I wanted to edit any of the files, it's kind of cumbersome because I can only do that through the terminal. The files aren't exposed to Windows file system at all. So I'm going to set up a Samba share from the VM to my computer. And doing that is not too complicated. There's a couple manual steps involved, and they're listed here. So the first thing is you need to install Samba inside of Ubuntu. So I'm going to copy that command, and I'll just go back to my project root because it's my home base. So I'm going to install Samba first. It's going to ask for confirmation. I'll say yes. So it's going to install that, and then I need to set up a share. And I'm going to share my project folder from the VM to my Windows computer. So I'm going to copy this out, and I'm going to remember to change project name to my project's name. So I'm going to copy that, and whoops, not in there. In here, I'm going to say sudo nano, etc. / it's samba/smb.conf. And then if I say shift control K, or shift control V, usually use Vim, so I'm not too used to nano, I can skip to the bottom of the file, and then I'll paste in that text. And for some reason, nano pastes it like this, so I'm going to have to reformat it really quickly to make it each option be on one line. And all these different options are just telling Samba how to make the share happen. So make sure that all the share files are writable and readable. Also in this case, I'm going to say allow guest access, which means that people can connect to this share without a password. Since the way that Drupal VM is set up only creates a network on the local computer and not on your LAN or on the wider internet, that's not an insecure option. If somebody has access to your computer, then you have other problems besides Drupal VM sharing a folder. But you could turn this guest OK no if you wanted to, and then you'd have to enter in your password to be able to access the folder name. So I'm going to change this project name to EEJ Geerling, and change it here as well. EEJ Geerling. EEJ Geerling. There's probably a faster way to do that in Nano, but not super used to it. All right, so Control O writes the file and Control X to exit. And now I need to restart Samba, or just make sure it's started in general. So I'm going to copy this command. I'm on Ubuntu 14 right now, so I use the init system with sudo service, whatever it is, restart. So I'm going to copy that. If you're using Ubuntu 16 or another OS that uses systemd, then you would use this command instead, using system control. So I'm going to copy that, paste it in here. And I also want to make sure that whenever I bring up the VM, it boots and has this share already ready to be used. So I'm going to copy this out to say always run Samba when it boots. And I'll paste that there. And then the last step is mounting the shared folder inside of Windows. So I'm going to copy this path out, and I can just browse to it directly within Windows Explorer. I'm going to copy that, go to Windows Explorer, and go ahead and paste that in here. And of course, my project is a different name, so I'm going to say eejgeerling.com/project name share, and this would be EEJ Geerling, and I'm going to copy this because I might need this path a couple more times. And if I go there, I should see that here's the files in here. And just to prove that this is the same file system, if I create a new file in here, test.txt, it shows up over here. And then if I edit this file in Windows with Notepad++, test, and then save the file, and then save the file like that. Then I can cat test.txt, and you can see that it has the contents of the file as it is in here. So that's working correctly. And now the last step would be if I want to have this permanently accessible as a shortcut over here, I can say add a network location, use a custom one, and then paste in that path. Click next, and I'll call it EEJ Geerling, something like that, and finish. And now, if I ever need to, I can go to computer, and then I have this network location as a shortcut. And this will still persist, so if I shut down the VM, let's say I'll exit here and say vagrant halt, this folder, this network location still exists here, but of course, since the virtual machine is turned off, if you double click on it, once it shuts down, if I double click on it now, it should give me an error after it times out. So once I bring back the VM again, if I say vagrant up, after it boots again, this share should be accessible. So this is a way that is probably a lot faster if you're doing a lot of loading of the VM in Windows. It's a lot faster to develop this way. The one major downside is if I'm in an application like Notepad++, which is over here, if I'm in here and I wanted to open the entire project, and let's say I paste in that path, first I need to make sure that the VM is up and running. So I'll wait for that to boot. If I paste in this path, the one major downside is that the file access for the entire project will be a little bit slower because it's using the Samba share and it's not natively looking at the files on your Windows file system. There are some workarounds for that, and it's not the end of the world. It's still pretty fast to be able to browse in this interface, but it is something to keep in mind. That is the one downside to this. If you're going to do a global find and replace in your whole project, it might be better to do it inside the VM since that's going to use the native access instead of in your IDE in Windows. Thanks for watching the video. I hope that you got something out of it that will help you in your development. And if you want to keep seeing videos like this, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Christian Blaul, and I'm terrible with last names. I'm sorry if I totally butchered that. Christian was the last person to support me, so he gets a shout out this video. Thank you, Christian, and thank you too. If you find this video interesting, please click like, share it, subscribe. There's plenty more where that came from, and I will be posting more videos about Drupal VM and maybe even some more about Windows in the next few months.